Namaste. Welcome, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my channel. This video is part one of two, and I have brought together 50 of my best tarot tips. Many of these I shared in my Tarot Advent series, which I will link in the description box below over the past couple of years. As well, many of these tips have been shared in various live streams and different places. I thought I would bring all of these together here for you today and in the subsequent video, highlighting Sadhana's top 50 tarot tips. This first tarot tip is one that I encourage all beginning students, as well as when you get a new deck, especially if the deck has taken on different energies, slightly different meanings. And that is to extract a suit, or perhaps even to extract all of the, for example, if you're working with the number 8, extract all of the number 8 cards and spend some time only with that suit. That might mean if you've got 14 cards from one suit, over the course of a couple of weeks or even just 7 days, you're going to draw a card from a suit. Now, this deck, which I purchased sometime in 2024, I haven't spent a lot of time with, and I am really curious about the particular feature of the suit of wands that has been selected to come to the forefront and how I might work with this. Because I have been building in a lot of Golden Dawn correspondences to my readings, astrological correspondences, I want to see what is here and what this deck is bringing forward. And it was this particular card that caught my attention, this Nine of Wands. And I'm just noticing here how in many of these cards there is a single wand that is featured. And I think this is a really good idea for this deck. And I love what's happening here. But again, we have a single wand that is featured. So what is this single wand saying? And so this exercise is one that not only will get you to know a particular deck much better, but it's also a way to connect with the energy of an element. And I don't think that we can become proficient readers if we can't speak to the energy of the elements themselves in the decks. And so this is one of the primary reasons why I suggest working with a one suit exclusively for a set period of time. All right, tarot tip number 2 is to create a pack of 16 court cards. And these might come from one tarot deck. They might come from 2 or more tarot decks. And the purpose of this is to have these cards with you as you go throughout the day so that you can start to apply energy, actions, faces to the court cards. We all need to spend more time with the court cards. There is so much richness in these 16 cards. And by carrying these cards with you, you may be sitting alone at a coffee shop, listening to a conversation, observing the barista behind the counter. You could be at work and have just had an encounter with somebody who's just joined your team. Or maybe you are sitting with your family watching television, and there is a particular character in a show, and you go, yes, she is going to become my Queen of Cups. So this is it's a really good thing to do, and you might want to choose your favorites from a number of decks. And if you struggle with finding your favorite King of Pentacles, I did do a tarot series called Top Tarot Minors, which I will also link below. And you can scan through to the almost final video and check out all of the King of Pentacles that are my favorites. This is a new deck for me. I haven't shuffled it, worked with it, other than sharing it in a recent video. This is the Fifth Spirit Tarot by Charlie Claire Burgess. And these are the 22 majors. And short of going through the 22 majors and doing what I usually do when I get a new deck is I just say hello and I welcome each of the cards, taking note of things that are familiar, unfamiliar. What I want to do with this deck is understand the energy of its creator and what it wants to say. Now, working with majors only or doing readings with majors only is a tradition uh, from the Tarot de Marseille tradition. There are a lot of readers who don't include the minors in their readings. And it does give a very, very different feel. So, what I want to do right now is just go to the deck and ask it a question about an upcoming trip that I'm taking to go and visit one of my daughters. There has been some issues, tension. So I'm just going to ask, what can I expect? What is going to be the energy of this visit? Temperance. And I want to allow this deck also to speak its signs and symbols. Okay. The first thing that I saw was the beach, how perhaps the development of temperance or tempering what's going on in a relationship may be aided by a beach walk. I'm also noting that with justice here and the scales, that perspective is very important, but I want to honor how we both need alone time. So one of the things I was worried about was not staying with my daughter for 2 nights, that she might feel kind of snubbed. And because the second night I'm going to go spend it with a friend, or I asked her what she would think of that. And I like that the hermit is here in that it honors that alone time to do what I need to do. There's something also here about independence. Justice as an adjustment card or justice as a karma card. Finding a new way of being, and this card as well too, finding a new way of being in this relationship with my daughter. Separating maybe we were too intertwined in the past. Isn't this lovely, this arc? Also, okay, let's do this. Let's look at these symbols that are kind of ethereal. There's a sword, wings, and then the lantern. So there may be a story to weave here. Sword, air, truth becomes wings, becomes a lantern. It feels empowering that we can both stand in our own truth and yet heal this relationship. That maybe we do stand between the dark and the light right now, but there is a way. There is a way to find a peace, a balance, and a harmony. And sometimes I feel that we need to pare down what we're working with, get back to basics, review techniques. And so if you're only working with 22 cards, this is going to force you to do just that. And one of the things I didn't do here was look at astrological connections or something like that. So that might be a next step. And I think working with majors only is also a way, if you are studying astrological connections, zodiacal correspondences, that you can begin to sort of amp up your practice with that. And then much later, add in the minors, and I would even take this to the next level. Let's just work with let's say you are working with the Sagittarius energy, and so maybe you're going to work with temperance and the wands cards, or temperance and just the 8, 9, and 10 of wands. Or maybe you go from this step and you get your Leo card and your Aries card and all of the wands. And so these first 3 tips are going to help you to get stronger with your vocabulary in your readings. For some reason, you may not be able to carry a pack of cards with you. And this is something I like to do when maybe I'm going to work, I'm traveling by bus or train or subway. I'm going to be somewhere where I can't lay out cards. Or maybe I'm going to somebody else's home and I don't know if there'll be a time or a space to play with cards. So, in that case, I may take a tarot guidebook, or I've got 2 small ones here on the table. And what I suggest for this particular practice is that you choose a book that has good binding. And in the case of both of these books, this one is older and has lovely stitch binding. And another similarity between these 2 books is that both of them have colored pictures for the cards. So it's like I have all of the cards with me, plus I have all of the oracular messages as well as the card descriptions. It just can make things easier if you want to continue your tarot practice and it just doesn't make practical sense to have the cards with you. Now, another reason for this is when you have again, it's this new deck thing. There's lots of different ways to get to know a tarot deck. This deck was gifted to me by a lovely student who is from Finland. And I know very little about Finnish mythology. I'm thinking that this would be an excellent book to have in my basket. And whenever I have a moment to do a reading. Now, when I do a reading with a guidebook, I go through the same sort of practice. I close my eyes and take a few breaths. I set an intention, and I may fan through the book one way and then fan through the book the other way, and just allow the book to open where it will. And in this case, I'm looking at, I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm looking at maybe a page of cups. Shall we go see? I'm just guessing. It is the Queen of Cups. Look at this lovely big drawing. Okay, so for some reason, and I didn't really set a question, I was thinking about the previous question I asked, and that was about my daughter and our upcoming visit. So again, here we are at the water. This is a page, right? So there is maybe something about seeing myself in my daughter seeing herself in me. But what is it about this particular page that has something to teach me? And so I want to read through the myth, and I want to read through the oracular message and just receive that. This is really different than just taking a guidebook and studying a guidebook, because you may remember the responses and where the cards showed up in a reading. I find that it's a way to develop a new relationship in working with guidebooks as well too, rather than doing a reading and then pulling the guidebook for more information. We have a very special purpose for working with a guidebook. Choose a guidebook where this kind of practice works well. For me, an affirmation practice with the tarot is about getting back on track. It's about building confidence, regaining focus, determining what really matters. And this is something that is really powerful and quite different from doing a reading. And so I'm going to keep in mind this general theme that I'll work with it throughout. Um, I'll work with it throughout each of these prompts today. When I saw the mushroom card, which is the tower, it makes me think of my daughter. My daughter is a forager. She's one that has taught me a lot about wandering through the forest and foraging for mushrooms, herbs, various things, roots. And so it makes me think of her. It makes me think of connections, the way about the mycelium. I'm also, of course, aware of the presence of dramatic change. I'm thinking of a nurse log and how a nurse log breaks down over time, completely transforms. And so, as I sit here and reflect on an affirmation for this card, may this visit with my daughter bring deeper connections. And through those deeper connections, may it open new pathways for our relationship, breaking down what is old, allowing for new growth. And if I was sitting quietly on my own, I would likely take this to pen and paper and try to pare it down to one sentence in the affirmative and really work with it throughout the day, acknowledging how the breakdown allows for nourishment. I love doing research. It's it's so fascinating. I did a series last year for the Frida Kahlo Tarot Avatar deck, and reading biography, watching film really helped me to connect with the cards. And when I think of a deck like this and the connections, the power of connections that could be made through deeper understanding of the cards, imagine how expansive and where you could go with this. Now, granted, this deck would take a lot because there are 78 different fairy tales from all over the world, or myths from all over the world. There is a beautiful larger book that goes with this one, and it really is a stand alone book. because it doesn't name what each of the tarot cards is. I remember the first time I read through this book. I think I had the book before the cards, or perhaps I ordered them both and I decided to work with the book first. And I read through each of the fairy tales, which is only one page, and tried to figure out which card was being represented. And I really appreciate that this book only has one page per card because it's a digestible amount to get to know a deck that has 78 different stories. However, if you have a love for mythology, this is a wonderful book to take you deeper into exploring mythology. And I know it's been a while since I have read the Mahabharata. I have a copy here, a Penguin Classic copy. Just before I came on, just opened the book and started to read a few sentences, and I was comparing and contrasting what Yoshi Yoshitani had chosen to include here. I mean, I'm not going to read through whole books to learn a 78 card deck, but that could be part of a year long study and an intention is to source out the original story. I had I was part of a tarot challenge a couple years ago where somebody worked with the John Bauer tarot, and they did just that. They researched the source of each of the pictures that was included in that deck. I think it does make a difference, and it does make it easier to work with a deck if you spend some time and do some background work, like I did with Tarot Avatara. I couldn't have got as much out of the deck and the guidebook if I hadn't read the biography by Hayden Herrera and watched some of the videos. There are different approaches to this concept of pathworking, and I thought today I would share with you what it means to me. This deck is Tarot of the Strange Branches, Le Tarot au Remords Étrange. And when I find myself captivated by scenery in a deck, I like to take time with a card or two. And this is one that has really captured my attention. And so, what I do is I sit quietly where I know I won't be disturbed. And I try not to do this as I'm falling asleep. I do like to do this and be in a state of mind where I will be able to come back and journey and remember what's happened. And so I hold the card close to me and do some conscious deep breathing. Observe. Sometimes I talk aloud and I might name the trees or the flowers and imagine what it would feel like to be in this scene. I imagine that the splash of the water would be felt. I think about taking off my shoes and feeling the earth beneath my feet, and maybe even sitting on the edge of the fountain and placing my hand in the water. I'm curious about the single cup that's on the edge of the fountain and whether I might pick it up. I'm curious about the light that's behind, and I take into my waking open eyes the full expanse of the picture, the canopy of trees, the seeming pathway that lies beyond the fountain. And when I feel ready, I close my eyes and find myself in this scene, and then allow myself to wander and to experience the environment. I may meet a four-legged friend. I may meet a human. And this might be a couple of minutes. I might actually fall asleep. But if I am, for example, on the sofa like in a meditation posture or sitting on a meditation cushion, I won't completely fall asleep. I will come back, and that'll give me an opportunity to really learn something about the landscape of this card. And so, for this technique, or why this technique, again, it's about developing different kinds of relationships with your cards. Maybe finding healing space. This strength card is really interesting. It reminds me of the Lion King, that scene where Simba finds his father within himself. And I'm noticing here these tattoos. And so part of my experience in wandering into this card may be discovering what those tattoos reveal. So I would suggest for this exercise to choose a deck that kind of tugs at your heartstrings, where you find the scenery intriguing. Yeah, I suggest you don't do it just before you go to bed, but to do it in a quiet waking moment. For this tarot tip, there's a couple things I want to share with you. One of them is on the screen, and that's about reading facings with opposite time association. And then I will expand on that a little bit. This is the tarot of Lisa de Saint Croix. Beautiful deck. In a tarot deck, generally speaking, you're going to get cards that face to the left and face to the right. And depending on how you study the tarot, you might believe that cards that face to the left look to the past, and cards that face to the right look to the future. However, if you have done any work with languages that are written right to left, including Hebrew, which is part of Golden Dawn correspondences, then you might want to rethink that. Even if you cut your cards from right to left, and what that might mean for you. So when I look at this Page of Swords and I ask that question, is this energy reflective or is it forward facing? And that might be another layer to a reading beyond what I'm picking up from the cards, but it's going to also depend on whether or not all of the cards are facing in the same direction or in different directions. And in this case, everything is facing to the right. Well, if you traditionally, or if your habit is to read that this is all forward looking, then I challenge you to do this a little bit differently. So if we are working with Golden Dawn correspondences, this is a Waite-Smith inspired deck, which takes us to that kind of correspondence, and Hebrew is read from right to left. Then it would follow that this is looking into the past. This is not forward looking. These are all reflective energies. So here in the Four of Cups, this figure is reflecting on a past time, a past incident. Knees are to the right. The general body language is to the right. The Queen of Swords also may be tapping into some information, some lesson from the past, and maybe even something that they learned from a younger version of themselves. This is Page of Swords, Queen of Swords. And I really like to play with this because you get different information, or you can unpeel different information if you are interpreting this as reflective versus this is forward moving. Now, of course, cards are not always going to be facing in the same direction. I love this Ten of Wands. So, this Ten of Wands is moving to the left, and Queen of Swords is moving to the right. There may be some kind of conversation here because they are moving towards each other. So, beyond using facings for foretelling or past reflection, this is also really important in a reading to see which cards are talking to each other as opposed to moving away from each other. So, I find facings to be full of layers of information. There is nothing like really getting to know a deck. This doesn't mean that you won't work with other decks in a year, but it means that you have an intention to spend, to have a weekly practice, maybe even a daily practice with a particular deck. I have found a deck that I have wanted to spend an extended period of time with for a long time. I just haven't had time to do it because I've been so busy. And so this year, I am going to take time to get to know Legend, the Arthurian Tarot. It's a deck that I've had for a long time. And I am fascinated with Arthurian legend. I fell in love with the art of Anna Marie Ferguson, because of the Llewellyn Tarot. And some time back, I did a comparison video of the two decks. This one is kind of silver, the other one's very gold. And I was asking questions, well, is this a lunar reflective deck versus Llewellyn, which is a solar active deck? It was a very interesting question. But I knew that this is a deck that's going to take some time to get to know. Now, some of the characters from the Arthurian tales, of course, I do know from books, from television series, and so forth. Many of these stories are kind of famous, and others not so much. And so, in working with a deck like this, because the entire theme is Arthurian, there are connections among cards. And so I will be able to weave together connections between cards. And I know I'm going to start with the Fool. And I know, for example, that the Fool is connected to the Temperance card, as well as the Ace of Cups, as I've already done a little bit of research. I know that it's going to take me at least a year to get to know this deck. This will not only help me in studying this deck, but it will begin to create new associations with the tarot. I also am aware that Anna Maria Ferguson in general has some different background with swords and wands, and that it's going to take a bit for me to digest where she's coming from in those two suits. And so I want to be open to listening and receiving what her book as well as her cards have to say. This is not something that I can do in a few weeks. It's going to take a long time. I want to share with you a couple other decks that I have spent a year or more with, and why I did it, and why this tip is so important. When I was beginning my tarot journey, it was not at a time where we had thousands of decks to choose from in stores or Amazon or Etsy or wherever you get your decks from. There were far fewer tarot decks to choose from, and so it made more sense, or it was easier to work with a deck for a long period of time. The first deck that I spent more than a year with was the Osho Zen Tarot. And I had looked for other decks that I might connect with, because the art on the Waitsmith was not necessarily calling to me. And so through a daily draw and weekly deeper readings, and really working with both the guidebook that is included with that deck as well as the extra guidebook, I really got to know those cards and began to understand the connections from more traditional Golden Dawn associations in that deck, as well as the Buddhist teachings or the Osho teachings that come through that deck. So there's a couple of things here. One is that there are often supplemental resources as well too that can help you expand with this. And as far as working with this deck goes, I am going to also draw on Claire Duval's Arthurian deck, which is a new one for me, and maybe do some comparing and contrast with the Morgana cards or the Merlin cards and looking where the different creators have chosen to place them in the tarot. I also did this with my Alice decks, and rather than working with a deck for a year, work with your Alice decks for a year. See where different deck creators put different pieces of the story and how you might come to understand that part of the story by different creators' choices of where they're placed in the tarot. So it's really fun, and it is a lot of work, but it will help you to expand your understanding of what's going on. Another deck that I have spent years with and years getting to know is the Wildwood Tarot. And this tip is really useful for decks that have different systems. So if you're learning a new suit order, the court cards do something slightly different, there is a different timing system in the deck, then spending time with the deck will most certainly help you out and bond really with the cards. And like I mentioned before, it will also help you to find connection with the deck creator's unique take on the card and likely its correspondence to a more traditional meaning. The inspiration for this tarot tip comes from years of reading across the table, across the camera lens, seeing all kinds of different perspective with the tarot. And generally speaking, I organize my tarot decks, and when I put them back together, all of the cards are facing in the same direction. So if a card is facing upside down, it's not intentional. And I do pay attention to that. So if a card, even though I have ordered a deck, everything right way up, ends up upside down, I see it as an emphatic message. Pay attention to me. Sometimes no more than that. It's definitely a card that wants to be known because, generally speaking, for me, the first card that is drawn, which I believe I placed here in the center, is going to be the most important card in the reading. However, there are two majors in this reading, so that kind of cancels each other out because generally major arcana tend to have a stronger pull to them. And now we have a court card in between two majors. So that's a whole other conversation. My point here is that sometimes you will be looking at the cards from different angles. And what if instead of focusing on the word reversals, you think of it as a different angle? Suppose that this card came in upside down. You would have a different perspective. You might, like right now, I'm thinking about the unnatural weight that this part of the card feels very airy, this part of the card feels very dense. And so there's this density that is weighing down on the card. You might see something different in the window when the card is turned upside down that you don't notice when the card is right side up. You may also see a shape differently, and the way that the leaves appear in this wheel. Perhaps you will see, I don't know, the mouth of an animal or something different. And when the card is turned upside down, it gives you a different perspective. For years, I didn't flip my camera, my second camera, when I was doing YouTube videos. And so I was, from my perspective, always looking at the cards upside down, allowing the viewers, you the viewers, to see the cards right side up. And this allowed me to get to know the cards in a different way, to see different things, to pay more attention to relationships between cards, to the direction and the flow of energy in the cards. I suggest that if reversals are a scary thing for you, that you simply change your your word and think about it as perspective. I mean, what if you were looking at the cards, let's put two of them here, from this perspective instead? When I look at this moon, there's something about the way that body is dancing into the moon. She's going to fall into the moon. We see something different with every different angle that the cards are viewed from. It's like putting on a different set of glasses. And I think this can help when you're stuck as well too. So perhaps you do have a reading where you've got the Student of Cups in the center and you have these two majors and you have no idea what is going on. There is some sort of impending pending change. We have the wheel card, we have the moon card. Both the wheel and the moon reflect cycles and shifts of energy. And you stare at these cards and you go, well, what is changing? What do I need to pay attention to as I move through this change? And what I suggest here is that you simply look at the cards from a different direction and see if you can pick up something different. This is a great way for you to get more comfortable with shuffling your decks in a less organized fashion. And I think it takes the weight off of the fact that reversals have a negative meaning or an opposite meaning, because that might not be the case. Sometimes we just need to see things differently. All right, let's go back to the question about my daughter. What do I need to know to better navigate this upcoming visit? This is Tarot of the Abyss by Anna Torian. We had temperance in the middle of that first reading. Reciprocity is really important, and also this sense of independence and finding one's own way, taking time and not forcing anything. Now, sometimes we need um, more information. And what I mean by a two voice reading is choosing a different system of cards or You may choose another tarot, but I find it's very hard for me to match tarot and tarot. I prefer to use an oracle or a Lenormand deck or playing cards. This is the Aurum Lenormand by Melissa Wotherspoon. In Lenormand, the mice is not a very good card. The mice erode and they eat away at things. They cause damage, and in this case, you can see the mice are eating the wheat that is for the humans to harvest. But it's funny, and I know Lenormand is not meant to be read like an oracular message. But what I'm picking up here again is reciprocity, giving back. We are giving a little to the animals. However, there's something here that is being eaten away. And this card showed up above the Knight of Pentacles. So I want to honor that as well as, let's put these in the order that they were drawn, because I tend to read Lenormand in a different way. One mouse is facing one way and one is facing the other. The dog, loyalty, trust. Something is eating away at trust. And what I'm picking up on this message above is perhaps the source or a confirmation of the source of the struggle between the two of us. And this is confirmation more than anything else. It's funny how the cards just tell you what you already know. And having another voice from another deck can be really illuminating. And those three little birds, the chatter, the noise, the gossip, reminds me of how important direct communication is. Hearsay, he said, she said, not directly going to the person that you need the information from and asking them directly can do great harm to a relationship. When I look at this card here, I sense the need for healing, the need for picking one another up. Kind of powerful. Two voices gives you a different perspective. This is Pagan Otherworlds. This is a playing card deck by Usi, which I have just shuffled. And I did spend a good part of last year studying playing card associations. And I'm going to begin to use playing cards more as the second voice in a reading rather than reading with playing cards exclusively. But I think this is really interesting how these cards have shown up here, in that there is a directness of communication that is required to heal this relationship. And I love that this card of love and maybe the offering of love and healing has shown up in the playing cards. This is the Alleyman Tarot, and these are the 78 cards that I chose from that deck to be a part of my Alleyman deck. It's funny, before I purchased this deck, I had done a very similar exercise. I'll link the video below. I chose a favorite card for each of the 78 cards from 78 different decks. Unfortunately, when I put my 78 cards together, they were all of varying sizes. And so the creator of the Alleyman resized all of the cards so they fit together and you can shuffle them. So if you create your own favorite 78 card deck from 78 decks. Unless you have the resources, you won't be able to do that. So, what I suggest is that you choose several decks that have the same size of card. This is the Ehrenberg Tarot, Sasarai Bito, and Tarot of the Abyss, just as an example. These cards all are the same size. So, what I could do is find a couple more decks and choose favorite cards and put together a unique 78 card deck. Now, why might I want to do something like this? Well, perhaps in this deck, I really like the Suit of Cups. And more than any other deck that I'm working with, these cups really speak to me. Perhaps I could say the same of the Suit of Swords in this deck. And oh my goodness, the majors in this deck, I'm just absolutely loving them. And again, like all of these tips I'm giving you, these are tools and techniques for becoming a better tarot reader, for different ways to find your path into the tarot so that it all becomes a lot more seamless. And so, for a period of time, you will have these decks all mixed up and a few cards from each of these decks. And you just put them away in a separate bag or you have them on your table and you put you put the remaining cards that you're not using away and just work with this very unique deck where you connect with each of the suits. I have done a lot of tarot challenges over the years and taken a lot of tarot courses, guided a lot of deep studies. And I can't say enough about committing to a tarot challenge. This particular one was a 78-day challenge where there were certain reflections for each of the cards, and I compared and contrasted the Thoth Journey Tarot with the Asherah Tarot and went deeply into both of the guidebooks and compared and contrasted the decanic information as well as all kinds of correspondences. And it was really, really hard because the ask was to write every single day and to share every single day. To commit to something like this also means that in some cases, other people are reading your work, that you're wanting a certain level of investigation, and it can get really, really intense. And so, something like this, where you are writing every single day and comparing and contrasting decks, could be something that you do personally. It may not necessarily be something you do in a public forum like on Facebook, um, but it is so beneficial to creating a discipline with your tarot practice. And I can't say enough about it. There is another one here, which you may be able to catch a glimpse of. See if I can expand in here. I attempted, see if it will come into focus. I created my own personal challenge here, which was 52 cards, 52 weeks. And my commitment was to myself that for 52 weeks, I would share and study and talk about my journey with playing cards. Now, this became a little onerous, and it was very difficult for me to see it through. I think I might have done about 36 or 40 weeks. And yet, you can see here, episode 1, Black versus Red. I did this sort of privately. I did it in my little Facebook group, and I did it in the evening where there weren't a lot of people around in the chat, so I could just show up and share what I had read or what I was learning. And it was really, really hard. But like I shared with you now in the two voice reading prompt, that I have some confidence now to bring playing cards into my two voice readings. So, yeah, cannot say enough about committing to a tarot challenge or a tarot course. Tarot tip number 14 is to change the voice of the reading when you are struggling. So let's suppose we do a 3-card reading. You look at the cards and you get stuck. So here we have King of Swords. First card was Justice. Third card was Ace of Pentacles. You really don't know where this is going. You don't know how it responds to your question. Why is justice showing up as the response to your question? So you shift your voice. Instead of the voice of a reader, you shift it to the voice of a storyteller. And one thing that is striking me here is the strength and the independence of this particular figure. There's a knowing in this eye. There's perhaps a wanting to be seen. And so I might begin. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who saw the world very differently. She had the feeling that she was alone. The way that she viewed her surroundings, her home, friendships, her dreams, what she wanted to do when she grew up. Nobody really understood what she saw and what she dreamed of. Everybody saw her as a strong and powerful, independent person, and yet inside, she didn't feel quite seen. There was a weight that this difference of perspective put on her. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. There was almost an immobility that this dichotomy created for her. I don't know if this was the perfect example because I just drew these cards and started talking. However, this shift of voice can free up your need to interpret the cards. And normally, with an Ace of Pentacles, this is such an unusual Ace of Pentacles, I would be talking about something kind of different. But what I do when I struggle like this, or when I can tell that, and this is probably when I do it more frequently, I can feel that the querent is not picking up what I'm laying down. And so I pause. Let's try this again. And you start to tell the story in a different voice. And this also makes it less personal. It's not about you. It gives you the freedom to tell a story. And whether this is for yourself or this is for another person, they may hear associations that you have no idea what they're talking about. And I remember one time I did this for a nurse. I remember the reading, the place of the reading. It changed everything. And then it also gave her the freedom to see something in the cards that neither of us had seen. And once she pointed that out to me, then another layer of meaning was revealed. I have a couple of different tools that I use to expand or personalize a reading. Sometimes I will also do this before a reading. And if I'm working with charms, I have a bowl of charms here. I may allow a querent to go through the bowl. I'm just going to randomly select one right now. And sometimes I will get them to close their eyes and to choose a charm as well. And when I look at the dragonfly, I see the connection to this reading. There's a longing to fly free, almost like in this Ace of Pentacles. And I was telling in that story, um, there's something that ties me. Maybe there's a um, too much responsibility, a sense of not belonging. It's like the dragonfly is born in the water but lives in the air, goes back, lays its eggs in the water. So there's a sense of displacement. And sometimes in drawing a charm or a token, um, you might have another method, you can get reinforcement. I like to have either myself or the querent draw it randomly. I also have this set of coins, and there are 22 coins in this bag, one for each of the major arcana. So I'm just going to draw one now. And this is the world. And in weaving that coin into this story, I think it would give me permission, if it was a reading for me, to move on, to shift from the present set of circumstances, to know that it's time to wind things up where you are as you know it, that this stage, this leg of the race is come to an end. And you've done a great job. Honor and congratulate yourself, and then move on. And so, like the two voice reading, sometimes a charm, or if I use my tarot coins, this it can help to expand or confirm whether it comes before or after. And of course, the weaving will be a little different if you draw it before the reading. And I will demonstrate that in the next tarot tip. Tip or trick number 16 is to use tumbled crystals, or have a pot of tumbled crystals at your side on your table. Usually, I try to set it up so I have two or the same number for each chakra, because I like to work with chakras and crystals. And so if a client is familiar with a particular crystal, I want to make sure that there are some that they don't know as well too. So I'm not only going to use the standard well-known crystals for each chakra. So I tend to shift this up, what's in my bowl. And some people do like to close their eyes and randomly choose one, and others will want to gaze at the rocks and pick one. And so I usually let them do this before the reading. And then this is going to set the tone for the whole reading. It may also, I mean, questions are really important. So I will have already discussed the theme and the question that is arising. But let me just do this. So this is blue lace agate. And there's a softness to blue lace agate. I tend to connect it to throat chakra healing. And because I work so closely with the chakras, I have some associations that may not be familiar to you. And it also is going to depend on the question that the querent asks. But if they were asking about relationship and they chose the blue lace agate, I would know that their voice perhaps is not being heard in the relationship. I wonder if they are being, and I'm going to use the word soft just because blue lace agate is such a soft and gentle color, that they are dummying down their voice, or they don't feel heard, and that the healing of the relationship may very well come through developing more confidence and exercising their voice. And I would give them skills like practices of how to do that. It can come through just singing. It doesn't have to be anything particularly, um, yoga like. You don't have to learn how to chant a mantra. And then I would begin to draw some cards to expand and tell the story. There's a labyrinth in the center of this Ace of Wands, and I have an interesting connection with labyrinths. Labyrinths are part of meditative practices, journey practices, and this feels like a message that says what is it? A journey begins with a single step, that it is time indeed to pick up your wand and to take action. And I would say this action is connected to skills and ways to assert, remember, fire, suit of fire, your voice. And so I begin to weave together a layer that may not necessarily have come if I hadn't have chosen or had the client choose a crystal to start to respond to the question. This is such a gentle King of Cups, and I wonder if there is a mentor or a grandfather type that you could practice speaking with, that you could share your heart with. This could be a counselor, but I feel like it's somebody that you know that you're really comfortable with, and that learning to assert yourself indeed comes with practice. This will begin to carve a new path. This is a way to begin to heal this relationship and your relationship with the relationship. So incorporating crystals or tumbled stones into your readings. And I say tumbled stones because they're small and they're easy and you can put a bunch of them in a single pot and have it easily on your table. You can really expand. And there's lots of other things you can do with crystals and readings, but this is just one suggestion. Tarot tip number 17 is a game changer. Until you read publicly, you won't have the level of confidence that you need to read at a certain pace, a certain speed, to share your experience with the tarot. Now, there are baby steps that you can take. I know that I have taken cards and I journey by ferry from where I live to Vancouver, British Columbia. And sometimes on the ferry, I will sit down in the cafeteria and I'll place a cloth down on the table and I'll shuffle some cards and do a reading for myself. Sometimes people will wander by and they'll ask me questions, or I can pull a couple cards for them. So that is completely different than applying for a table at a psychic fair or something like that, right? So that is a really, and you could do that at at a coffee shop or anywhere that maybe you kind of go out of the way somewhere where you're not going to run into people that you know for the first few times, and you just try this and you interact with people. The only way you're going to get really good at this is to practice and to put yourself under a little bit of pressure. You may also want to offer and share readings in a Facebook group. So I know there are a few Facebook groups like Tarot Nerds where you can share free readings, and that is another way. And some people share those by video, and others share them through chat or written responses. And I suppose that written responses are good, but they also are a way of, they're not quite the same as putting yourself in a position where you need to speak now. So, yeah, it really is a game changer. And if you have an opportunity that arises where you can share your love of the cards with other people, I strongly suggest you do it. Tip number 18 is to try a three voice reading. And by now, you should see that I have a lot of different tools on my table. This could also be by using a number of decks from the same creator or the same illustrator. So here I have the Wildwood Tarot. This deck is illustrated by Will Worthington. And I have chosen two other decks that are also illustrated by Will Worthington. Well, we have two cards of balance. We have the Two of Arrows and the 14th card of balance. And in between that, we have a rather fiery little page, perhaps learning to see balance in a new way, or as the keyword suggests on that card, learning to understand what appears as injustice in a new way. All right, this is the Celtic Lenormand. We have the Child card and the Anchor. I want to say that know that you are safe. That while you may be going through a time of uncertainty and you're not sure how to get your feet back on the ground, that you come from, I feel like you do, you have a good experience, you have like strong family values, and you come from a place of stability. So tap into that. I'm going to draw an oracle card as well, and this is the Druid Plant Oracle, also illustrated by Will Worthington. And I will refer to the guide this one. Now, sometimes in this card, there's clues in the background and the foreground as well, too. But I'm seeing a kind of Ace of Wands energy here, which speaks really beautifully to the Page of Bows that's here. There's also kind of a tenderness too in this release of water. Maybe there is something to let go of. I'm intrigued with the standing stones that are in the background. I wonder if there's a bit of a journey to something to build connection or to rebuild connection. And then when I look at the 14th card, which is called Balance in this deck, you may know this as a card of temperance or art. There is action that is required to restore balance, to restore harmony. And I think you know how to do this. You may just have forgotten. And when I look at that little stoat, I'm worried about reaction, reaction versus response, like moving too quickly, moving too quickly. So the cuckoo pint is about union, creativity, and harmony. The cuckoo pint displays the chalice and blade united. This symbol at one level is the union of man and woman, but at a deeper level is the goal of the Druid and all spirit seekers, the union of the masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche, sometimes termed the mystical marriage or the alchemical wedding. And isn't that uncanny that we have the Temperance card here, which is also known as the alchemical wedding? So, without going too deeply into this, I would say that there's an injustice that is being perceived, and this is only a perception. And you have the ability and the tools. And what is most important here is the restoration of your fire and water, that you have a really hard look at how to balance that. And everything indicates that you do, even though this little stoat can be very quick to react. There is a sweetness and a tenderness and a sense of fire and water in this card. Listen and then respond. Tip number 19 is to get creative with your use of numerology in readings. I always encourage students to pay attention to the numbers. You may have a repeating number in your reading. You may have a bunch of twos or a bunch of ones and tens and things like that. However, one way to summarize a reading is to add up the entire reading. Now, if you have a whole bunch of cards, this might take a pen and paper and a few minutes to do. But just to demonstrate this, what I would do is to add the two of arrows, and the 14 of balance. So that is a 16. And normally I would use the number 11 for the pages. But in this case, I'm going to use the number 14 because in this deck, the order of the court cards is King, Queen, Knight, Page. Pages are the final court card. So 16 and 14 is 30. So what am I going to do with the 30 here in terms of this reading? Well, 30 reduces to 3. A number of holding space for what is growing. I think of 3 as a womb of sorts, a container in which to develop something. And I think that little stoat is indeed ready to expand. They are on to something. They have the potential to understand this notion of justice, injustice, balance, and harmony, and being a more balanced human being. But there's something that isn't quite understood or born yet. So I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time in development. So that might mean reading a relationship book, doing a little bit of self reflective study. Um, uh, the advice here is to not go ahead quite yet. There's more to be understood, received, before you respond to how you are feeling. And so, in adding up all the numbers in a reading, you may find a lovely way to summarize the reading. You might find a correspondence that you missed. More often than not, there is always a brilliant connection to be found. Tip number 20 is to take the idea of journaling following a reading to another level. If we respond artistically, creatively, we are using a different side of our brain than the analytical side of the brain that wants to understand the reading. For me, I'm not much of a painter. I do occasionally do watercolor painting and I love it. And poetry has become an integral part of my tarot practice, both using poetry from my Wee Moon journal and various other books that I have where I can draw on poetry to expand and deepen my understanding of a reading. But in this case, I'm talking about writing a poem. And it could be something as simple as and I'm not saying that haikus are simple, but it just letting it flow and take you to a surprisingly creative response to the reading. So, one of the things I said with this reading is your reactionary response is not appropriate at this time. It's time to kind of let things just be for a while. And I'm going to start my poem with the flow of the water. As the water gently flows through the forest, I honor the fact that it knows not where it goes. The water trusts. Water heals, erodes, and it is all a part of a journey. The river is ever changing, and it is a long path. Fire and water. Fire and water are two parts of a whole, and this is a journey of understanding my unique oneness, to learn to look within and to respond rather than react. If responding creatively to a reading isn't in your wheelhouse right now, there is always work to do following a reading. I think it is such a waste, especially if you go pay for a reading and you don't have a photograph or a recording of the reading, you haven't made notes. Please, please do those things. We receive these beautiful insights, and then I feel like there's a time for silence that is required, and then a time for action. In this particular reading, to understand what is required to restore balance may not be known right away. It's really important to pay attention and to look for signs and things that come into your day and your life to help restore balance. And so when I say there's always work to do following a reading, it might be reading a book, it could be listening to a podcast, it could be a silent walk in the forest, it could be sharing your reading with a close friend. There are all kinds of ways that we can respond to a reading. And it's just really important that it's not something that just happens and is forgotten about, because otherwise, why do we do it in the first place? These are the extra cards from the first edition of the Lonely Dreamer Tarot by Melissa Wotherspoon. There is the Dreamer. This is a beautiful card. You see the profile of somebody meditating in amongst a bunch of wild flowers. There is the Seeker. There is this no named card, almost like an Aphrodite card. There is L'Ombre, the shadow, and the Guardian Spirit. Now, most tarot decks don't come with 5 extra cards. Many do come with 1 card. And there are a lot of things that you can do with extra cards. I have previously spoken to the integrity of a tarot deck. A tarot deck of 78 cards is based on certain connections that are made with the numbers in the deck. There are 14 cards in each suit. There are 22 cards in the major arcana. Altogether, there are 78 cards. There are 4 court cards in each of the minor arcana. And all of these associations with the number 4, the number 7, when we take out the Fool, the major arcana has 7 times 3, 21. The magic and mystery of these numbers all works together. There are 11 sevens in the tarot. So when we take out the Fool card, which is the number 0, we have 77. So there are 7. There are 11 sevens in the tarot. And when we start adding extra cards, extra oracle cards to a deck, it really does mess with the magic of the numerology, in my opinion. So for the most part, I don't tend to shuffle in a bunch of extra cards. Sometimes I will leave in 1 if it is a card that feels like it's calling to a reading. Now, what I might do, and I know with this particular deck, I did substitute this card for the Fool card. So there may be an extra card that you feel is a better choice for the deck, and you may be able to do that. This Dreamer card, I believe in a later edition, was renamed. It may have been replaced for the Hermit card. So certainly that is something that you can do, is you can use the extra cards to replace an existing card in the deck, if that makes sense. Sometimes the extra cards have a particular theme on them. And why don't we work with the Shadow card? And this, of course, is a much misunderstood energy. It looks very dark here, and there is a lot of darkness in this deck. Odin Roland, there's a lot of dark, bleak paintings that really speak to a troubled time that the artist was going through. But I think we can work with this in the general meaning of shadow and just begin to explore an aspect of something that I am not seeing clearly. So if I have a particular question, so I can go back to the question about my daughter and the underlying issues of what has caused this rift in our relationship. What am I not seeing? What is the shadow of this relationship? Of course, over the years, there are certain things that I suspect, but we can ask the cards this. And I may just leave this card on the table as a focus card and then shuffle the deck and put some cards around it on the table. That's certainly something I can do. Or I could put the card in the deck knowing that it is my topic card, it is my focus, and then see what lies around the shadow. Okay, so it is deep. Let's see. Yeah, it is deep in the pile. Um, and I may read something into that. So, one of the cards around the shadow is the Queen of Swords, the Queen of Truth, the Queen of Independence. And is this not a theme that has arisen in some of the other readings around this question? This idea of embracing individuality, our own path, and perhaps our own paths, as she is a reflection of me. And on the other side of that card is strength, which is my Leo card. I'm wondering if this also speaks to an overbearing nature that I possess. So that's really insightful. And then there's a Three of Swords there as well too, and it brings more compassion to this, that we are both hurting. We are both healing through this relationship. This is one thing you can do, is to choose one of the extra cards, put it in the deck, use it as your focus. Okay? So that is definitely one. Sometimes I have a lot of decks that have very sort of sunny and positive affirmation, happy kinds of cards. And these can also be used in a similar fashion if you are looking for a pick me up. For example, how might I find the joy and happiness that is, I'm thinking of, for example, the Playful Heart Tarot that has some really happy cards. How might how might I find this? Or where might I find this today? Sometimes we get stuck on the how and why questions rather than where, but we need to remember that when we're asking the tarot, we can ask who, what, where, when, why, how. There's all kinds of words we can start with in forming a question. So I invite you to just kind of think about those two important thoughts. One being that leaving a bunch of extra cards in the deck really does change the energy of the numbers, the integrity of the deck, but also um, there's something kind of special in these extra cards that the deck creator has uniquely created for this deck. So, from time to time, why not use them as cards of focus? Or, as it says in the title here, you could even use them as positions in a unique spread for your deck. And I know that some decks even have extra cards that are obvious positions of a spread, like as above, so below, or seasons, or things like that. All right, I hope that helps. I think there's something very unique in the artwork of Pamela Coleman Smith in that we have many stage cards in the tarot. And the fact that all of the twos are stage cards. Working with the metaphor of stage, the stage of life. And that's not actually what I had intended. But life as a stage. We are players on the stage, that we actually design these scenes that we find ourselves in. Might give you an opportunity to see these cards in a different way. I wonder as well too if you shifted the backdrop and you imagined the backdrop could be rolled up, and you could slide in a different background or backdrop, what you might see there. These stage cards give us room to play with the tarot and play with the meaning of the tarot. And I know that we have seen some cards where you see a flip of 180 degrees and what's on the other side, or a shift of perspective. I know there's one horizontal deck that expands the scenery in directions left and right. But I think this metaphor of stage we can take to other decks as well too. Just think about the stage upon which we stand, where we are, where we find ourselves, in what environment, in the scene that we find ourselves, rather than always spending so much time interpreting the cards. This card means da 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 da. What stage do each of these figures find themselves on? Why have you found yourself there? So, if you look at that Two of Pentacles, you have found a place at the edge of the sea. You are alone. You are outside in nature. Here appears you are up. You're up high. You are up on a pedestal. I think that this metaphor of stage, and here you have found yourself in a place of confinement. This use of stage and setting and scene can be taken to another level to inquire more deeply into where you find yourself. Now, granted, the stage may be quite different from card to card, and this is something that you might want to just do with individual cards. If you do an individual card draw, which I know most people don't do very often, but it certainly is a way to practice and to work with this powerful metaphor. Tip number 24 is to incorporate either your card of the year or the card of the year that represents the theme, the number, the energy of the year into more of your readings. This is not something that you can only do in January or your birthday. This is an energy that you can build into your readings all year long. So 2025, the year that this is being recorded, is a 9 year. The overall theme is the year of the Hermit. So, regardless of your card of the year, there may be a focus on inward journeys, self reflection, taking a new path, seeking knowledge, seeking light and higher information, being alone more often. It's an invitation to incorporate that theme or that lesson into any readings that you do weekly or throughout the year. It's not something that you might do in every single reading, but it's certainly going to add a layer and deepen your understanding of a reading. So you might want to pull a hermit card from another deck, or to pull out, like, say your card of the year is the Chariot card in a hermit year. Well, you want to pay attention to the active energy that is apparent in the Chariot versus the inward moving energy of the Hermit. And yet, if you work with astrological connections, you'll know that the Chariot is connected with the Crab, with Cancer, with a layer of self protection, and how the Crab may journey inward, not so much like a turtle, but there's a sensitivity and an importance of that, protecting that inner layer. And so, how might you incorporate your card of the year with the theme of the year into a monthly reading? Tip number 25 is to pay more attention to color. It does matter. The deck on the left, this is the Centennial Waite Smith, the Albano Waite, and this is the Wiser Tarot. As color shifts in a deck, Certain energies may arise, come to the forefront. There's a lot that can be seen. So, for example, in the albino weight, that red color in the background to me really speaks to the martial energy, the planet that rules Scorpio, and that speaks really loudly. It is in strong contrast to the sun that is in the background, as well as the priest or the pope that's on the right side of the card. Very different energy from the purple gown that you see, the purple robe in the card on the right. Perhaps there is something that you pick up with the energy of the red saddle in the Wiser Tarot. In the Temperance card, the water takes on a different energy, a different color. You may wonder about the little bit of red that's in the foreground of the water. The wings of the angel or the seraphim are slightly different reds. And we see the rainbow in the center card, which we don't see explicitly in the other two cards unless you know the connection between the irises and the rainbow. So, color really does play into meaning and just the way that we respond and we feel to the cards. Paying attention to color may help you choose the deck that you want to work with. There might be a certain color palette that you respond to that helps you to interpret and understand the cards, whereas maybe the deck on the left is just too neutral. And yet, I think it's really important to take some time to notice the shifts in color, what they bring up for you. You might want to compare the Lover's card to the Devil card and see how those colors shift energy from one card to another or other cards that have association. So, definitely pay more attention to color. If you have made it this far, thank you kindly for being here, and I will see you for part two for tips number 26 through 50. Take good care. Namaste.